The clerk will please read Senator Sears' amendment.
Amendment number 249 by Mr. Sear, unlocking housing production.
Senator Sear.
Thank you, Mr. President, and through you to the members, I rise to speak on amendment number 249, which is on a critical topic facing every corner of this Commonwealth, and that is our housing crisis. So this body, along with our friends in the House and Governor Maura Healey and her administration, led on historic housing policy last session in the Affordable Homes Act. This legislation authorized $5.16 billion in spending over the next 5 years, along with 50 policy initiatives to counter rising housing costs caused by very high demand and limited supply. But at the time when the bill was signed into law, I think many of us acknowledged that this was just but a start of what we need to do to course correct on housing in this Commonwealth. When the bill was signed into law, it was estimated that the Affordable Homes Act would build about 65,000 housing units in the next decade. We think that number is probably lower than that now, given tariffs, inflation. So let's just say maybe about 50,000 housing units would be built by the Affordable Homes Act in the next decade. That is far short of the 220,000 housing units that are estimated by the administration that we need to build. I think it's important that we understand how we got to this housing crisis. We have seen a historic decline in the number of homes that we're building in Massachusetts. So historically, Massachusetts consistently delivered about 30,000 homes annually until production fell dramatically in the 1990s. Housing production now stands barely at half of that. There's about 15,000 permits that are pulled annually. The COVID-19 pandemic brought further setbacks, kind of reshuffled people's lives, increased demand for certain real estate assets and homes across Massachusetts, certainly in my neck of the woods on the Cape and Islands. And really what has happened, because we have not built enough homes, because we have not built enough homes, affordability is increasingly out of reach for most people who don't yet own a home. Families in Greater Boston have seen a 55% jump in home prices since 2019, pricing out many people in their communities. People who live in these communities today couldn't buy today. They bought years or decades ago. A household needs approximately to earn $215,000 a year annually to afford the median home price in Massachusetts. $215,000 a year, just to even be able to have a hope of getting into the market in eastern Massachusetts. You come to Cape Cod, we've seen a 70% increase in housing costs in just the last 4 years. This has devastated our workforce, devastated our ability to be a year-round functional community. And I won't even talk about the extremities of the region where I live in Provincetown or in Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard that have seen far higher increases. But even in Yarmouth, on the Mid-Cape, probably the most affordable town in Cape Cod, median home prices jumped from 340% to jumped from $340,000 to north of $575,000 in just those 4 years, a 69% increase. These hikes in our housing costs, right, are displacing so many people in our communities, our teachers, our nurses, our hospitality workers who can no longer afford to live in the communities where they serve. Older adults on fixed incomes have limited options to downsize. And we really are in a predicament where so much is going right in this state. If you look at how we lead the nation in education and healthcare, and so many of the investments that this body and legislature have done in decades have positioned Massachusetts to be one of the strongest economies in the country. And yet where we have failed and we've not done well is on housing. And I think for too long we've prioritized an excessive control. We've not allowed housing production. We've underbuilt our Commonwealth. And we're now seeing the consequences, particularly for people of my generation, for millennials, for Gen Z, who are increasingly priced out. Listen to your staff, right? The people who make this Senate run. So many of them struggle if they don't yet own a home to be able to afford a home. So many of them, of our kids, of my peers, of your children and grandchildren, right, are saying, I love Massachusetts for all the reasons we love Massachusetts, but I can't afford to tap in to the American dream. And so we have quite a bit of work to keep doing here on housing production, on zoning reform, on permitting reform, on further protections for consumers. And I'm so appreciative and grateful to our Senate President, who has kept housing on the very front burner of this body's agenda, to my partners who serve on the Joint Committee on Housing, my Vice Chair from East Boston, my colleagues from Andover, from just outside of Gillette Stadium, from Weymouth, from, I'm gonna forget someone. This is always gets tricky when we name everyone by town. But the Housing Committee's been working and meeting, and the Senate President tasked us with taking on the first 100 days of the committee meeting of outlining what we can do on housing. And so thanks to the Senate President, thanks to the Chair of Ways and Means, we have worked to file Amendment 249, Unlocking Housing Production. And what this amendment does is it provides a roadmap for how we're going to implement a number of policies to advance housing. There is not a one-size-fits-all. There is not a silver bullet that's going to resolve this housing crisis. But there are a number of policies that we need to advance. And we were given a very helpful roadmap. There was an Unlocking Housing Production Commission that the administration convened. It is chock full of very good, very urgently needed policy remedies. And our goal with this amendment is to start to implement but a handful of them. And I encourage my colleagues, I encourage folks who are interested in housing, if you haven't picked up a copy of this report, this is one of those reports that has all these specific tangible action items that's really giving us, I think, a roadmap on how we can keep moving the ball forward on housing production. So first, this amendment includes a study of a housing construction sales tax credit exemption. We task the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities and the Department of Revenue with assessing how we can implement a sales tax credit on construction. We see housing projects not penciling out because of rising construction costs due to unpredictable federal tariffs and self-inflicted economic volatility from Washington. Builders can't predict, nor can we predict, unfortunately, Washington and this federal administration's next move. But this exemption study, in a very swift timeline, has to be done by the end of the year, will help to stabilize construction costs and allow us to figure out how we can keep projects moving forward. This study is going to take a look at a menu of how the sales tax credit can work, right? Should this apply to multifamily housing? Should this apply to single-family housing? How do you account for the difference in housing costs if maybe you're trying to build in my good friend from Northampton's district versus if you're trying to build on a place like Martha's Vineyard? How do we take into account these rising and escalating costs? We've already seen a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports. We've seen Canadian soft lumber increase from about 8 to 15%. Excuse me, not 80 yet. Probably will go there. So we're very concerned about this. But the objective here is to allow us to figure out how exactly we would structure this sales tax exemption so that we get it right. What this should apply to, how long should it go, should it be sunsetted? All of that will be figured out in this swift examination that we can then bring back and give us a perspective on how we should implement this. The second component here, one of the other recommendations out of the Unlocking Housing Production Commission was the use of third-party inspectors for housing projects. So this is a policy that places like California and Colorado have already implemented. If you are attempting to build with manufactured housing, or you're attempting to build a larger development, it can be very hard to get access to local inspectors, right? Inspections done in Massachusetts. We have 351 distinct municipalities, each with their own land use and zoning and inspection and permitting functions. If you want to talk about red tape, that's a lot of red tape. It's a lot of this stuff. So what this study would do is task the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, along with the Board of Building Regulations and Standards, in looking at how we can implement a licensed third-party regulatory scheme here in Massachusetts. Inspector shortages will hobble projects time and again. If you've ever been involved in trying to build something or renovate something, right, waiting to hear and waiting to get the part-time inspector to come and to inspect the electrical and the plumbing, the framing, then the insulation. In my town, in Provincetown, right, they'll come and inspect the framing, then the insulation, then the drywall. It's adding all this sort of time. They're following a universal code established here statewide in Massachusetts. We really think third-party inspectors could reduce delays on housing projects across the state. Another component in this amendment, we task the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, along with ANF and the Department of Revenue, in examining giving towns flexibility to exempt affordable housing projects from Proposition 2.5 tax levy limits. And really what this component of the amendment does is it examines how new affordable housing could count towards a municipality's levy for the purposes of Prop 2.5. This is something we actually adopted in the Affordable Homes Act, so it's an idea the senators have felt was good once. But again, this is about more tools that we can try to advance on housing production. And then finally, in this amendment, we increase funding to the Board of Building Regulations and Standards so that they can boost their inspection capacity, they can boost manufactured housing. In the Unlocking Housing Production Commission report, there's a whole section talking about how Massachusetts could really benefit from uniform standards, state inspections of manufactured housing, and really if we're going to task BBRS with doing this work, we've got to give them the resources to do that. So this amendment boosts funding to critical regulatory work so the administration can move forward. Again, cutting red tape, boosting production. I want to be very clear-eyed that this amendment does a number of things that lays the groundwork for us to keep moving the ball forward on housing production, but we have a lot more to do. And I really hope, and I'm encouraged by my colleagues on the Joint Committee on Housing, my colleagues in this chamber, who time and again talk to me about the urgent need for us to move forward on housing. So I really hope to be back, hopefully once we adopt this amendment, but hope to be back in this chamber working with all of you, making the case for us to take on housing production. Massachusetts families can't wait. We can't wait. We need bold steps, smart reforms. Well, we need to build an affordable, stable future for the people who call Massachusetts home today and the people who want to call Massachusetts home. So for these reasons, Mr. President, I hope the amendment is adopted, and when we do so, I hope it is taken by a call of the yeas and nays.